Let's bring in our diplomatic editor, James Bays. He's joining us from the United Nations. So what would you say has been the main takeaway message from the ambassadors after the closed-door meeting?
I'm afraid it's a message that we've heard so many times when it comes to Syria in the last 8.5 years, and it's not really differed, even though we have the new development of the Turkish military operation, and that is deep division in the UN Security Council. You just have to look at the fact that the Security Council was meeting in open session for a meeting about Colombia, and when they decided to discuss Syria, they went from the main Security Council chamber into the consultation rooms next door, where they have the closed sessions of the Security Council. I think they didn't want their divisions to be on display. You heard from the European Union, you heard what was said in their statement a moment ago, and it's clear that there was a lot of wrangling behind the scenes to come up with that EU statement among the 5 members of the Security Council who are from the European Union, and certainly France and Germany wanted the strongest language. France, I'm told, didn't want any mention of what Turkey had done over the last 8 years in terms of its role taking in so many refugees. A lot of wrangling there. One assumes there was a lot of wrangling potentially in the US administration because the US also made their statement at the end of the meeting. And of course, it had to take into account that US position seems to have evolved in recent days after that initial White House statement following the talks between President Trump and President Erdogan on Sunday, which some say gave the green light to Turkey to launch its operation. This is what was finally said by the US ambassador.
Turkey is now responsible for ensuring that all ISIS fighters in detention in prison remain in prison, and that ISIS does not reconstitute itself in any way, shape, or form. Failure to play by the rules, to protect vulnerable populations, failure to guarantee that ISIS cannot exploit these actions to reconstitute will have consequences.
You didn't hear any statement from the president of the Security Council, speaking in his capacity as the president, representing all of the council, because if he's going to read out words at the end of one of these closed meetings, every Security Council member has to sign on to those words. And I can tell you the Russian ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, told reporters that they wanted, if there was to be a statement, one that covered all the issues of Syria and not just this particular issue of recent days. So again, clear division among the Security Council.
All right, James Bays, thank you. Let's get an update from Charles Stratford. He's joining us from Akçakale, that's near Turkey's border with Syria. And we've seen pictures, Charles, of fires raging along that border area. What can you tell us about the state of the operation right now?
Well, certainly the last couple of hours it has been relatively calm in this area, certainly in relation to the incredible bombardment earlier in the day. I'm just hearing what sounds to be machine gun fire in the distance. The Turkish army have been along this border telling civilians on this side to stay in their homes. We understand, according to the authorities, that at least, or maybe up to 9 civilians have been killed by incoming artillery fire from across the border. We understand also that this humanitarian crisis that we hear James talking about in the UN is right at the forefront of aid agencies and people who work in the humanitarian sphere in this region and around the world. 15 humanitarian aid agencies have come together and a warning of a massive crisis, and they give some figures just to put some context of what the Syrians are facing across the border. They say that there's an estimated 450,000 civilians live within 5 kilometers of the border. Around 90,000 of them have been internally displaced, and these aid agencies are trying to put as much pressure as they can on the international community to force Turkey to take great responsibility in obviously avoiding hitting civilian areas and acting, as they describe it, according to international law. But as we heard from James, and certainly evidence on the ground would suggest here that's going to be very difficult to do. The Turks say that they are targeting SDF targets, SDF military, what they describe as terrorists. They say that they're trying to set up this safety zone to try and rehouse some of the 3.6 million refugees living in this country. But when you're getting statements being made by such a large amount of humanitarian organisations, so concerned for all those hundreds of thousands of Syrians across the border, it just shows you, you know, what these people potentially are facing. As we heard in Zaina's package, thousands, we understand, have already started fleeing their homes. The town Tel Abyad behind me hasn't had electricity now for at least 24 hours. We saw it getting heavily bombarded earlier today, and literally in the last few minutes we have heard, certainly according to our sources, that the Turkish authorities in this area are now trying to push the media back to what we believe they think will be a safer area. Now, what that smells for the next few hours remains to be seen, but the situation very tense here, and obviously a very frightening situation across the border.
Okay, Charles Stratford, thank you for that update. Now, meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has doubled down on his decision to withdraw troops, saying he's trying to end what he calls an endless war. Kimberly Halket has the latest reaction from Washington.
U.S. President Donald Trump taking to Twitter on Thursday morning a series of 2 tweets where he indicated he's talking to both Turkey as well as the Kurds. The Kurds, of course, have been a reliable ally of the United States in recent years in the effort to defeat ISIL. Many in the United States believing that this decision to pull back and allow Turkey to conduct its military operation has essentially let down a very valuable and loyal ally to the United States. The U.S. president has been pushing back on that suggestion, also noting in this tweet that, in his view, the Turkish people as well as the Kurds have been fighting, in his words, forever, and the United States should not be injecting itself into an historic conflict. Now, having said that, the United States president also cautioning Turkey if there are what the U.S. president believes are inhumane or large civilian casualties. He has endorsed a movement in the U.S. Senate by a member of his own Republican Party as well as a Democratic senator to sanction Turkey. That effort could be voted on as early as next week, would not only potentially limit military sales to Turkey, but could also sanction at the highest levels, including President Erdogan, his financial assets, and even limit the ability for the leadership to obtain visas to enter the United States.